Hi folks, it's Brent Bozell with the Media Research Center doing a Facebook chat today. I've got as our guest a really important fellow and a fine fellow, someone I've known for a good number of years, Rich Lowry, the editor of the National Review magazine. For those who are not familiar with National Review, I don't know what to tell you if you're not. It is the preeminent conservative magazine of public opinion in America today, founded, I guess, in 54 or 55 by Bill Buckley, who founded it at age, if I recall this correctly, he was 27 when he founded it, and he turned to a 27-year-old, Rich Lowry, as his successor. So Rich, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. I thought we would talk about certain things, and then we've asked our audience to submit some questions, and there's some good ones. The first thing I want to talk to you is what happened about a week or two ago. You and I had a phone conversation about something. You were quite impassioned. What happened?
Yeah, well, Brent, first of all, pleasure being with you. Thanks for your kind words and kind words about National Review. 1955, founded in 1955. If anyone should know that, Brent, you should.
I was born that year, so I better.
Well, we talked about what's been going on, the rampaging in the streets, the vandalism against statues, the intellectual case against the founding and physical case against the founding. In some cases, the founders being pulled down. And want to do something to raise our voice. Now, obviously, it's a weird time. It's hard to go out and do huge counter demonstrations. But your idea, I can take no credit, but your idea was to get some people together, do a video, really forcefully stating where conservatives are on this country, the nature of this country, and what's happening in our streets and how unacceptable it is. So I wrote a draft. You edited the editor, Brent, fearlessly. And with only some squawking from me. No one likes to be edited, even an editor. And then you organized a bunch of people to get together and do this video. So I think it was a really important statement.
Well, you undercounted the importance of what you did. I asked you to write it because I know your writing. I know what you wrote after 9/11, and that beautiful piece you wrote, your love for New York. And I knew it was going to be a masterpiece, and it was.
Oh, thank you.
And it's had well over 1 million views on social media. I recommend people look for it at the MRC or the countless other places to find it. But watch that video, because you've got 16 of the top conservative leaders in America, each taking lines from Rich's script and quite forcefully putting their statements together. So it was terrific. But Rich, you understand, because I think National Review has always understood why and how culture is so vastly more important than the political. Speak to the cancel culture. How real is it? How permanent is it? And what needs to be America's response, and how?
Yeah, well, it's extremely real. There's no doubt about it. There's some denialism on the left, ironically, by exactly the same kind of people who are driving cancel culture. But you've seen high-profile media figures affected by this, and most disturbingly, ordinary people. They'll say all lives matter on their Facebook feed, and next thing they know, they're fired, which is just astonishing and illiberal and un-American. So it's a spread of something. Bill Buckley, his first book was God, Man at Yale, that began to diagnose what we've seen on college campuses, 50 or 60 years ago, when it was nothing. When we'd be delighted to be transported back to 50 or 60 years ago, and the situation was in college campuses. But he acutely recognized what was the beginning of this problem. It slowly took over entirely academia, and now it's seeped into the mainstream of American life. And a key aspect of this is the idea that speech is threatening. Speech is actually physically threatening to you. So we had this week the resignation of Weiss. She's not a right winger like us, Brent, but a moderate pro-Israel a writer and editor at the New York Times, who was harassed constantly for her views. There was a hostile work environment for her. And the people who did that at the New York Times to her felt justified in it because they felt unsafe that she was there and that she didn't agree with them. And she would write things they didn't agree with and publish things they didn't agree with. So this idea is very dangerous. And the problem is it's obviously has jumped the wall of academia. It's loosened our broader culture. And disturbingly, corporate America is on board this now. So it's not just a bunch of activists yelling at you anymore, and you can say, well, I'm going to ignore that. It's people threatening your bottom line. And, Monday this week, you had the Washington Redskins saying they're going to change their names. Dan Snyder, I'm not a Redskins fan, but I know Redskins fans hate Dan Snyder, their owner, for good reasons, given what's happened to the team. But he's been stalwart on the name, which is a great tradition, which brings together Redskins fans of all ages, all colors and creeds. But he had to give in just because the commercial consequences, because corporations were saying, we don't want this to happen. We're not going to sell your gear. We're not going to put our name on your stadium. And that's just really impossible, really difficult for anyone to resist. So this is a huge problem and is only going to get worse.
I'll go to Barry Weiss in a second. But isn't there something ironic here that this is something that has been fostered and fomented by academia? And yet, I am stunned by the sheer stupidity of people who are involved in this movement. The idiocy, the childishness, but the ignorance. I mean, tearing down statues of Ulysses S. Grant, defacing the Lincoln Memorial. This is, I scratched my head and I said, are these people so nihilistic, or are they absolute ignorance? And now I think it's both. I think they're ignorant, but I do believe, this is where I think that our movement isn't focused well enough. This is not a progressive movement that we're facing. The progressive movement takes something that exists and tries to take it to the next step, to advance it. Right. That's not what they're doing. They are just the opposite. They want a new country. They don't want a better America. They want a new nation, and you can't do that without destroying the old one. So this is deconstructionist. This is it's DEFCON 5 for America, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, all right. So let's move over to Barry Weiss. First of all, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, on the people in the streets, they're nihilistic and stupid, and a lot of them, they just see something, a statue in marble or bronze, just figure out we got to pull it down, and they have no idea. There was a great abolitionist who died in the Civil War. A statue, his name escaped me at the moment. A statue was pulled down in Madison, Wisconsin, and then newspaper interview, they're, oh, wait a minute, he was an abolitionist? We had no idea, and they don't care. They just want to destroy. But so that's bad, but even more disturbing is an attempt, as you appropriately say, to refound America on the idea that this country has been sinful at its core from the beginning and has to be remade as we speak. And the founding has to be intellectually toppled. That's what the New York Times 1619 Project is about. And it's disturbing because, we can say, we can spend our lives howling into the winds, and nothing we say is going to immediately be taken up by school systems around the country. All right. Whereas the New York Times publishes this thing, and everyone's like, oh, we're going to make it part of the curriculum going forward. Or we're going to write a book about it. We're going to make a movie about it. And just the cultural power of institutions like that is really incredibly strong and really hard for us to combat. So we are in the fight of our lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, do you agree with me on this? I think that the problem with conservatives is that we're impatient. We want everything done yesterday. And we are Westerners. We look at things from the standpoint of the short term, which is the political. The left sees the big picture and the long view and is patient. And it understands that it may take 25 or 30 years to realize the fruits of their labors. The gay rights movement is the best example of this. They lost 38 straight referenda and then won everything. And they've won more than they could possibly have dreamt they could win. But this started decades ago on their part.
Yeah.
Well, if all that's true, Rich Lowry, don't we need to be thinking about our own cultural upheaval that could well take decades when Rich Lowry and Brent Bozell and so many people who are watching us right now are gone?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would disagree with you to the extent we can be impatient, but we have engaged in some long-term movement building. I think the most stirring and stark example is pro-life movement. Told constantly from the beginning, 1970s, you're on the wrong side of history, you're going away, your cause is going to be extinguished. And nope, they kept the light going, and despite setback after setback, have held up this truth that every life is precious and should be protected, and the movement's made incredible progress. More to be done, to be sure.
Very, very good point.
That's been a 40-year effort, but we need to have that sort of long view with this struggle, and we need to start some sort of institution, Brent. I nominate you to do it.
Would you write it?
To monitor what's happening with history curricula
in
every single jurisdiction in the country. What is our ideal textbook? And how do we push our people to get school boards to adopt it? We need to engage at that level, which we aren't at the moment, and fight that for decades.
I may be about to insult somebody, and I apologize if I do, because it's not my intention. However, as I go around the country talking to people and I ask them what's the single biggest challenge facing the conservative movement, facing America today, the answer is becoming almost unanimous when they say education. And they point to education as the root of the evils that are hitting us today. And then you say, well, if that's true, wait for 20 years till they get done with the next stage of this. Okay, so we have within the broad conservative movement, we have organizations addressing everything. I can't think of a national organization we have addressing education. I know, different foundations touch on it, but do we have a single national organization focusing on what most people believe is the biggest problem we have?
I think we have organizations pushing education reform and school choice and charter schools, but I'm not sure we have anything focused on the content of education and history and civics in particular, which is so important. So that's an important gap.
Yeah, it's a gaping hole we have in the movement. So food for thought. All right, let's talk about Barry Weiss for a second. It's been a really rough time for the New York Times in the last few weeks. I mean, first you had a United States senator who was deemed inappropriate and unacceptable to be in the pages of the New York Times because they didn't like his suggestion that federal troops should be brought on to quell the mob violence. Now, agree or disagree with that, it was just not as you've said, a position that was allowed. Then Barry Weiss, I guess she's an editor there, but she wrote that beautifully impassioned
Amazing,
piece.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of heartbreaking if you think about the ethics of journalism, because she doesn't do it with any vitriol. She does it with a deep devotion to her craft, but pointing out that her newspaper, the Gray Lady, supposedly the bastion of journalism today, has collapsed where it comes to ethics. Then you have the editor writing that piece or the opinion piece in the New York Times, I guess yesterday or the day before yesterday, calling for the elimination of the Jewish state. And then you have got Liberty University that has launched a $10 million defamation suit against the New York Times. I listened to Dr. Jerry Falwell Jr. talk about this yesterday, pointing out how the New York Times said that because of their lax policies, they had 12 students that were COVID positive, and it turns out that not a single one has ever been tested. They still don't have a single person at Liberty that has been tested, and every effort was made. And then the sneaky part, Rich, that I think most people don't realize happens, and I've seen this all my career, you know it too, where a hit piece is written. It might take 10 months for them to investigate it. But when it's finally written after 10 months, they give the other side 1 hour to respond to a 10-year investigation. You know, in this case, it was months that they were working on this thing. They gave Liberty 1 hour to respond to it so they can say, we tried, but there was no response from the other side. Now that to me is chicanery. That's as unethical as you get, yet everybody does it in newspapers, and that's gotcha journalism. So what the hell is going on at the New York Times?
Well, I think it's comparable to what happened in, again, going back to colleges and universities, what happened on campus in the late 60s. You had a bunch of old liberals who headed these institutions. People now, ironically, that we probably have a fair amount in common with, but, you know, Arthur Schlesinger, you know, guys we never liked and always opposed, but like reasonable people, loved America. And they were toppled by the student New Left. And one reason they were toppled is because they were so used to being on, quote unquote, the right side of history and opposing conservatives and having no enemies to the left. When these radicals rise up on their left and say, no, you're the establishment, you're the problem, you're the fascist, they had no defense and they just surrendered. And I think a similar thing has happened at the New York Times, which is headed by liberals that, again, we oppose, but we could, you know, have a decent dinner conversation with. They're not crazy. They're not poisonous the way the woke left is. But you have these millennials who are woke, and now they're saying, you're the problem, you're the fascist, you know, Jim Bennett, you're threatening us with your op-ed page. Barry Weiss, you're threatening us. And there's no one to say no to them. There's no one who has the courage to say no to them. So they basically end up running these institutions. And people who should know better will not say no. So the op-ed page and the opinion page will now be ruined. I mean, it was never great to start with, but the diversity is being curtailed as we speak. And then this will seep into the news pages, which is, I don't have to tell you, Brent, has always been biased, but is going to get much, much worse. And eventually just the standards of the entire institution will be destroyed. And the New York Times, I hate it. I complain about it almost every single day. It does do good stuff. You know, they had an infographic piece about how the virus spread from Wuhan, you know, how many flights went around the world. It's just hard for any other journalistic institution to do that because the Times has so many resources. But that kind of limited usefulness of the paper will eventually be destroyed and it'll entirely become a woke institution.
Yeah, I think the left needs to pay special attention to an Alan Dershowitz. He's a liberal's liberal who says that his enemy is not the right, it's the far left. And that's what he's focusing on right now.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunately, there are just limits to, you know, we got to call these people out and bay against them and do everything we can to resist them. But at the end of the day, it's the center left that's more important to resisting them. So we need the Dershowitzes of the world to stand up and fight this fight. And, you know, there's a letter in Harper's that was pretty good, signed by dozens of kind of center left intellectuals. But a lot of them immediately said, I didn't sign that letter. I didn't mean to sign that letter. I'm sorry for signing that letter, just because they can't stand that pressure from their own left.
That's right. Okay, let me ask some questions that some of our viewers have asked. Megan wants to know how you first got started at National Review and how things have changed over the years.
Oh, that's a great question. So I was in high school. I came across the PBS program Firing Line, Bill Buckley's interview debate program he had for decades. I was like, this guy's amazing. Who is he? What is he? Oh, he's the editor of National Review. What's that? So then I hunted down an issue of National Review, began underlining articles when I read it, would sneak it into class to read it in spare moments. And I just always literally wanted to work in National Review. I remember there was a career interest survey that we had, and I think it was in a history class in high school, and they asked, where do you want to be 10 years from now? What do you want to be doing? I said, work for National Review, living in New York. So I've been very blessed, one, to just have that clear goal from the beginning, and two, but shockingly, been able to achieve it, thanks to Bill Buckley. So I started basically as a kind of an intern doing sort of scut editorial work in the early 90s. Then I came down to Washington as a reporter for a while. And then in what was exhilarating and terrifying, Bill Buckley selected me to be editor when I was age 29. At a time I still didn't understand many words Bill Buckley was using. I wouldn't to this day actually understand a lot of words he was
especially the ones he made up.
Yeah, it was a terrifying experience, but it's been an incredible blessing. Something I've been doing for more than 20 years. And I just have a hard time imagining, people ask me, well, what else do you want to do? And I can't imagine what it would be. So a little bit like I imagine you, Brent, sort of kind of stuck, if you have your dream job, what are you supposed to do? So it's been an incredible experience.
Okay, Aliana wants to ask, how can we fight cancel culture? Let me ask you to speak to Aliana and ask her and tell her how she should fight cancel culture.
Well, first of all, just be fearless. And it's a time we all have to speak up. And I've been sort of downbeat in a lot of my assessment here, but one of the great things we have still going for us is just the common sense of the American people, the sense of fairness of the American people. So we just have to speak out, speak the truth, call out the absurdity and the injustices that are happening, and hope the American public hears us and eventually yell stop against this trend. But as I say, I fear it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Moving over to COVID, I wanted to throw out some numbers at you on COVID and get your read on it. These are numbers that we looked at just yesterday from reports that came out. Ironically, one from the New York Times, but it was one of those few reports that you look at and it's just factual data that they have. I'm rounding these numbers off. Total number of COVID deaths, 138,000. Now, that's reported COVID deaths. Some people dispute, is it technically? Let's just assume that every one of them is a COVID death. Of the 138,000, 57,000 of them have come in nursing homes, which is to say 42% of all the deaths were people in nursing homes. That leaves you with 81,000 people who have died. Do a little bit of arithmetic. As part of the American population, that is 2/10,000ths of 1% of the American public has died. 2/10,000ths of 1%. That's 0.00024. Okay, that's one data. Another one. The deaths the week of April 18th, which was the peak, 16,895. The deaths on the last reported week, which is June 27th, 1,363. That's a decrease of 91.9%. And for all that, the country's closed in so many different places. What do you say about that?
Well, a couple things. It is a highly infectious disease, and at the beginning we didn't know a lot about it. There's no doubt. You look at those mortality figures, highly concentrated among elderly and people with various comorbidities. So if I had it to do over again, and I supported the initial lockdowns, I think we could have been looser on the lockdowns. They should have been more geographically sensitive than they were, focused on major urban areas. Just had a lot of counties locked down, and they never saw a COVID case and probably never will. That didn't make a lot of sense. And we should have focused more, on the other hand, on the nursing homes. And this is the terrible irony of what happened in New York. New York shuts down. Shuts down, a couple of weeks too late. I have a lot of sympathy, though. It's hard to say, okay, we're going to shut down a major city before it's evident what's going to happen. But then COVID patients are taken out of the hospitals and put into the nursing homes, and it contributes to this thing just running like a wildfire through nursing homes in New York, New Jersey, other states in the Northeast largely that had similar policies. So it makes no sense to lock down the general population. At the same time, you're exposing the most vulnerable people. And I'm Brent, I'm still catching hell for this article I wrote about Ron DeSantis a month or two ago, saying, where does he go to get his apology? Because DeSantis was, a couple months ago, everyone was saying, oh, he's an idiot. A beach is open somewhere in Florida. If you actually drill down what Florida did, DeSantis had an eye on the nursing homes from the beginning and said, you know what, if there's someone who has COVID in the nursing homes, we're getting them out. We're not taking people from the hospitals and getting them in. That's the exact wrong approach. So even now, when Florida's seen a big spike in cases, there's been that focus on the vulnerable population.
But Rich, I am startled though by the intellectual dishonesty by so many people who are A, in charge, and B, purport to have the public's best interest at heart. One of the things that we've learned, as you've said, is that nursing homes, and the numbers are right there, nursing homes have become death traps for people. The best intentions went wrong. And yet I don't see those who sent people who told people that they couldn't leave and shouldn't leave. I don't see anybody saying, boy, we were wrong about that. We've got to change our policies. Number two, whether it is Newsom in California or de Blasio in New York City that are issuing these edicts about all the things people cannot do, and you can't be in church, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other, and yet in both cases they have said officially, but you can protest in the streets. I mean, that is so dishonest. We're so dishonest. What do you say about that?
I mean, it's just you had epidemiologists basically taking their credibility and lighting it on fire because they like the idea of the George Floyd protests. So a virus doesn't know like what you're out in the streets doing and why. So the virus isn't going to say, "Oh, okay, this is a terrible thing that happened to George Floyd," which was. So you can go protest and we're not going to spread. That's not the way it works. And it was so incredible that you had these protests in Michigan, reopening protests now. Time's distorted for me, Brent. I don't know, like 3 or 4 months ago, largely vehicular protests. People were in the cars honking their horns about the Capitol, around the Capitol grounds, and like 75 people getting out and sort of milling around in this big courtyard, big yard. And the media was like, oh my gosh, Michigan is going to burn down. Governor Whitmer was like, oh my gosh, all these people, they're going to touch, the gas pump at the gas station. That's going to spread the virus everywhere in Michigan. Zero indication that any of that happened. And then like a month and a half later, she herself is walking in protest marches because it's George Floyd. So just the hypocrisy was stark and really hard to take.
Okay, two final questions. First one, what is a cop to feel today? How many people know that on average there is one policeman assassinated, in effect, whether he's ambushed or whatnot, by very bad people? Every single week, on average, one person dies, one cop dies from being shot or some other way. This doesn't even come close to the baseball bats that are hitting them in the head, the bottles that are smashing off their faces, and yet, if you read the newspapers, they're the ones at fault. They're the ones that are the ones that need to be held to account. How should a policeman feel today?
Well, they feel abused and disrespected and not valued. And they should. I mean, the way they've been treated has been disgusting. Now, they're bad cops, and when they're bad cops, they should be held accountable. Unless there's something that we're all missing. What Derek Chauvin did was horrific and was a crime, and he should be prosecuted for it, and he'll have a trial. And if he's guilty, he should go to jail. But that's the exception, though. That's not what most cops are. And what we've seen in this broader effort against policing is, New York City disbanded its undercover police unit devoted to checking violent crime. And what have we seen? Sure enough, shootings increase. And the shootings aren't happening in gated communities. They're not happening in nice salons in the Upper West Side. They're happening in the toughest neighborhoods in New York. And it's Black kids and Black teenagers who are overwhelmingly the victims. So, of course, Black lives matter. But those Black lives matter, too. And one of the most stirring and actually brave statements the last couple of weeks was this guy, Terry Crews, an actor, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the host of America's Got Talent, a really strong Christian. And he said, look, you know, I could have been George Floyd. That's terrible. It's heartbreaking to me. But let's be honest, you know, there's they're good white people and they're bad black people. And let's not make this a racialist thing. Let's not make Black Lives Matter into Black Lives Better. And the world collapsed on his head. And what he started saying, which I think is a great phrase, all Black lives matter. So yes, George Floyd's lives matter, but so does the kid who we never hear of, who's shot in the streets because Bill de Blasio has this anti-cop policy. Those lives matter as well. And this shouldn't be complicated. It's very commonsensical. Have transparency and accountability for the police like any other institution. Weed out the bad cops, prosecute the ones that commit crimes, but then support them, the rest of their work, because it saves people's lives and makes our cities livable.
And if there was intellectual and political honesty, one would need only look at the city of Baltimore that had its police strife about 5 years ago, whatever it was, and the public, led by the mayor and other elected officials, turned on the police, so much so that the police were too afraid, because they weren't being given support, to go into some of these areas in Baltimore.
Right.
Baltimore was about 10, 15 years ago. It was rated by Ray McNally as the #1 city in America, believe it or not, Baltimore. It's a gun zone now. It's a ghost town in some areas. It's a murder zone taking place. This is the consequence of those actions. But you know, they'll never admit it. Okay, I got one more question for you. This is the question you don't want me to ask, but you're going to have to answer.
You want me to ask it myself?
Sam wants to know your prediction for November.
Oh, I don't have a prediction about it.
No, that's not allowed. That's not allowed. Not on my Facebook chat.
Well, obviously, the election is held today. Biden would win, and Biden would win handily. And the president has a lot of work to do. He had a wind at his back as of January, February. Incredible economy. He can make the case, all right, you don't like me, you don't like what I tweet, but the conditions are good, and you got to admit it. And that totally shifted with COVID and with the lockdowns, and now you've had the tumult in the streets. So he's in a perilous position. He's going to have to win basically the second time in a row, the most incredible victory you've ever seen. You know, last time, you know, I thought he had about a 40% chance of winning, like intellectually, but I thought, no way. There's no way this is going to happen. And you know, a guy has never been in elected office, never run for office, didn't win a major war, and just comes out of nowhere and wins the presidency. And now, you know, an incumbent president, major disapproval on the COVID thing, economic conditions really rocky, poll ratings underwater, you know, down by whoever you believe, you know, 6, 10 points. This is going to have to be a major comeback. And and time's wasting too. So just every day he's going to have to use to hammer the message that the Democratic Party is unacceptable. The Democratic Party is going to drive Joe Biden no matter what Joe Biden says. And he's going to need some stumbles from Biden. So gun to my head, I would say Joe Biden's going to win in November, but please destroy this Facebook video, Brent, immediately after people viewing this, given the accuracy of my past predictions.
Oh, you know, I so much appreciate you saying your past predictions, because I find it just so remarkable how everybody today will tell you how they knew Donald Trump was going to win. Sure as hell didn't feel it that way the day before the election last time.
The good news is, if you look back literally like 4 years from now, 4 years ago, so he's down real clear average, something like 8.8 to Biden now. He was down by 6 or so to Hillary. And the news coverage was exactly the same. There was no one who gave him any chance. There was never any positive story anywhere. And he came back and won. And that's why you can never count this guy out.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more optimistic than you, I guess. I'm reminded of what happened in Nicaragua in their elections in 1991. Because I was down there as an election observer. The polls had the Sandinistas winning by 27 points. And on election day, I was asked to participate in a press conference with the heads of 3 other organizations that have been down there as election observers. And everyone predicted the Sandinistas were going to win. I predicted the opposition, that the Violeta Chamorro would win, which she did. But I gave the credit to a columnist who's passed, and I can't remember his name now, but I gave all the credit to him, where he said this is not an election, this is a referendum. And the question is, do you want to starve to death? And he said, plus, people don't want to tell the Sandinistas pollsters that they're going to vote against the communist running it. And that's exactly what happened. And I think there is some of that that's going on right now. I think at the end of the day, when people have to vote, they're not going to look at this as Biden v. Trump. They're going to say, this is a movement that is taking us to Marxism and is boasting that it's taking us to Marxism. Do I want that? And when I'm asked by a pollster who I want, and everybody hates Trump, well, I'm not going to say Trump. So I think it's going to be closer. Of course, we could all be wrong about this. In any event, Rich Lowry, thanks so much for joining us.
Brent, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. God bless.
You know what I think of
everyone.
you. We'll see you down the trail somewhere. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.